Like most toddlers, little Colin was full of energy. He was always on the move, exploring the world around him, finding new ways to keep his parents, Stephanie and Dylan, on their toes. So when they took Colin to his older brother's baseball practice one afternoon, they knew they'd have to keep him entertained. It didn't take long before Colin started running around the family car with his dad, Dylan, playing a game of hide and seek. The game was full of laughter and excitement, with Colin running behind the car and Dylan pretending not to see him as he hid. But then, amid all the fun, disaster struck. Colin, in his usual rush, tripped and fell, scraping his eyebrow. His parents heard him cry out for a moment, but when they checked on him, the wound seemed minor, just a small cut to his eyebrow. The youngster, despite the fall, got right back up and was eager to continue playing. He brushed off the incident, and so did his parents. After all, Colin had fallen plenty of times before without any serious problems. He's had worse falls before, Stephanie recalled later on the TV show The Doctors. So we thought nothing of it and went to bed that night. It seemed like just another typical fall that any toddler might experience. The following morning, everything changed. When Stephanie went to wake up Colin, she immediately noticed something was wrong. He couldn't sit up. At first, she thought he might be feeling sick, maybe even catching the flu, but then she realized there was something much more concerning. Colin wasn't just unable to sit up, he couldn't walk at all. He just lay there, unable to move in the way he normally would. Terrified, Stephanie rushed to call her husband, Dylan. "I thought maybe he was just sick, but when I realized he couldn't walk, I knew something was wrong," she said, her voice filled with the anxiety of the moment. Dylan wasted no time. He rushed home and without hesitation picked up both Colin and Stephanie and drove straight to the hospital. The confusion and fear clouded their minds as they tried to figure out what could have caused Colin to suddenly be unable to move. Once at the hospital, the couple explained to the doctors that their son had fallen the night before, but that he had seemed fine afterward. They explained how, despite the small cut on his eyebrow, Colin had been acting like his usual energetic self until the next morning. The doctors listened closely and quickly suspected that Colin might have suffered a concussion from the fall. It made sense. His symptoms fit the description of a concussion. To confirm their suspicion, the doctors decided to run a CT scan on Colin, hoping to find clear evidence of any brain injury. The parents anxiously awaited the results, their hearts racing with every passing minute. But when the results finally came back, they were a mix of relief and confusion. The scan showed no signs of a concussion. There was no immediate indication that Colin had suffered any major head trauma. At first, this seemed like good news. At least the worst-case scenario had been ruled out. But as the doctors continued to examine Colin, his condition seemed to worsen rather than improve. He was still unable to sit up or walk, and no one could figure out what was happening. The doctors were stumped. With the CT scan coming back clear and no obvious physical injuries, they weren't sure what was causing Colin's sudden decline. The parents, now even more worried and frustrated, felt like they were in the dark. Their once energetic little boy, who had been running around just hours before, was now laying in a hospital bed, unable to move. The parents couldn't help but wonder, what had gone wrong overnight? What had caused their son to change so dramatically from the happy, active child they had known? The confusion and fear weighed heavily on Stephanie and Dylan as they sat by Colin's side, waiting for answers. They thought back to the fall, wondering if they had missed something, if they had overlooked a symptom, or if there was more to the incident than they realized. But they could think of nothing that might explain Colin's sudden inability to move. The doctors, too, were at a loss. They had ruled out the most likely causes, but Colin's condition didn't seem to fit with any common explanation. And as the hours passed, Stephanie and Dylan found themselves sinking deeper into worry, unsure of what to do next. They wanted answers, but they weren't sure where to turn or who could help their son. Would this mystery ever be solved? This terrifying experience for Tiffany and Dylan was just the beginning of a long, uncertain journey, one where every new development brought a mixture of hope and fear. For now, they could only wait and pray, holding on to the hope that they would eventually find out what was wrong with their precious son, and that, somehow, he would get better. The story of little Colin is a reminder of how quickly things can change and how important it is to trust our instincts when it comes to the health of our children. In an instant, what seemed like a small fault turned into a frightening situation with no immediate answers. For parents, it's easy to brush off something that seems minor, especially when kids are always falling and getting bumps and bruises. But as Colin's case shows, sometimes even the smallest injury can be the start of something much more serious. It's a reminder that we should always listen to our gut, keep a close eye on our kids, and never hesitate to get them the care they need, especially when things don't feel right. When Colin first arrived at the hospital, he could only move his upper body, but his legs were completely immobilized. At first, his parents thought it might just be a temporary issue, something that would resolve itself in a few hours. However, as time went on, things quickly took a turn for the worse. By the evening, Colin's condition had deteriorated further. He could no longer sit up on his own. As the night went on, the 3-year-old's paralysis spread, and by the time morning came, Colin was almost completely paralyzed. He couldn't even drink his bottle. He couldn't eat his food, Tiffany, his mother, recalled. He just lay there. The only thing he could do was breathe. Dylan, Colin's father, added, his voice full of worry. The image of their active little boy, full of energy and life, now lying still and helpless was every parent's worst nightmare. As if things weren't bad enough, Colin's oxygen levels started dropping. It was a terrifying moment for Tiffany and Dylan. Desperate for answers, they made the decision to run a spinal tap to rule out meningitis, which can sometimes cause similar symptoms. However, the results came back negative, leaving the doctors scratching their heads and the parents even more frantic. Colin's condition wasn't improving, and no one could figure out what was happening to their son. With no clear answers and Colin's condition continuing to worsen, his parents felt helpless. Panic set in. That's when they made a bold decision. They decided to transfer Colin to a children's hospital in Memphis, Tennessee, hoping that a fresh set of doctors might be able to find the cause of his troubling symptoms. Upon arrival at the new hospital, doctors acted quickly. They told Tiffany and Dylan that they had arrived just in time. If they had waited just 30 minutes longer, Colin's body would have gone into cardiac arrest. The relief was almost overwhelming. They were lucky to have made the decision to transfer him when they did. But even as they felt a small glimmer of hope, they still didn't know what was wrong with their son. It was at this hospital that the doctors finally uncovered the shocking truth. A team of infectious disease doctors and neurologists conducted a thorough examination and found something unusual behind Colin's ear, a tick. At first, the parents couldn't believe it. A tiny insect, seemingly so harmless, had caused such a drastic change in their child's health. The doctors explained that the tick had caused Colin's paralysis. The tick's saliva contained a neurotoxin that, when transmitted into the host during feeding, began to destroy nerve tissue. This was the cause of the paralysis that had left Colin unable to move. Colin had suffered from tick paralysis, a rare condition caused by the neurotoxin. In some cases, if left untreated, the disease can be fatal, but thankfully for Colin, the doctors discovered the cause just in time. The tick was removed, and Colin was immediately started on an antibiotic to treat the effects of the paralysis. Almost immediately after the treatment began, Colin started to show signs of improvement. He slowly began to regain movement in his feet, and with each passing hour, his strength grew. As the days went by, the boy who had been unable to move at all was now able to wiggle his toes, and then his legs. His body began to come back to life. Tiffany and Dylan watched in awe as their son, once so still and helpless, slowly returned to his boisterous, energetic self. They couldn't believe the turnaround. The joy and relief they felt when they saw Colin starting to move again was indescribable. The parents, who had feared they might lose their son, now had their lively toddler back. It was a moment of victory and overwhelming gratitude. Despite Colin's miraculous recovery, Dylan couldn't shake the feeling that things might have turned out much differently if they hadn't made the decision to transfer him to a new hospital. "I think that if my wife and I hadn't made the decision to go to another hospital, I don't think he would have made it," Dylan admitted later, reflecting on the crucial choice they had made. The couple's decision to take their son to another hospital had undoubtedly saved his life, and they both knew it. The experience had been a roller coaster of emotions for Stephanie and Dylan. They had gone from feeling helpless and desperate to finally being able to breathe again as they watched their son improve. They were incredibly grateful for the doctors who had caught the problem in time and provided the right treatment. Colin's case was a stark reminder of how quickly things can change. What had started as a fun day at the park turned into a nightmare for the family. A tiny tick, unnoticed and seemingly harmless, had caused a major health crisis that could have been fatal. But thanks to the swift actions of the doctors and the parents' decision to transfer Colin to a more specialized hospital, the toddler made a full recovery. Tick paralysis may be rare, but it's a reminder of how important it is to stay vigilant and seek help as soon as something seems off. The difference between life and death can sometimes come down to the smallest details, like noticing a tick behind an ear or being aware of sudden, unexplained symptoms. For Stephanie and Dylan, their quick thinking and the timely intervention of the right medical team had made all the difference. Colin's recovery was a blessing, and his story serves as an important reminder to parents everywhere to always trust their instincts and never hesitate to seek medical help when something feels wrong. For this family, it wasn't just a happy ending. It was a second chance they wouldn't ever take for granted. Colin and his family appeared via video link on the medically themed talk show The Doctors, and what they shared left in awe. Colin, the little boy who had been paralyzed by a tick bite just days before, seemed to have made a miraculous recovery. On the show, Dr. Travis Stork explained that while tick bites are common, the form of paralysis Colin had experienced was quite rare. He went on to explain that this type of paralysis is not related to Lyme disease, a bacterial infection also spread by ticks, which can lead to long-lasting symptoms. Dr. Stork clarified that tick paralysis is caused by a neurotoxin found in the tick's saliva. This neurotoxin hangs out in their salivary glands, Dr. Travis told the audience. So, while the tick is feeding, that neurotoxin gets into, in this case, Colin's blood, and that leads to what we call an ascending paralysis. It starts in the legs, and initially, the person experiences an inability to walk. The explanation left stunned at how such a small, seemingly harmless creature could cause such a serious condition. Stephanie and Dylan, Colin's parents, shared that ticks were a common problem in their home state of Oklahoma. "We get ticks all the time," Stephanie admitted, though she never imagined that one of those tiny insects could have such a devastating impact on her son's health. Like many families living in areas where ticks are common, they had grown accustomed to removing ticks and didn't think much of it. But this time, things were different, and their world had been turned upside down in a matter of hours. As the family explained how they had rushed Colin to the hospital after he started losing the ability to move, Dr. Stork emphasized just how rare tick paralysis is. He further explained that while the disease is terrifying, it's not something that typically causes long-term damage, especially if treated quickly. The good news was that, unlike Lyme disease, tick paralysis does not have lingering effects. This was a huge relief for Colin's parents, who had feared the worst as they watched their son struggle to even sit up. Now, after the proper treatment and the removal of the tick, Colin was on the mend. His recovery was nothing short of remarkable. Having gone from being completely paralyzed to nearly back to normal, Colin's transformation was hard to believe. It's hard to believe it was just a few days ago that Colin couldn't even walk, And now he's back to running around, Stephanie said, her voice filled with relief. In fact, Colin had gone from being unable to move to being a ball of energy again, much to the exhaustion of his parents. He now finds it hard to sit still. Stephanie laughed as she watched her active 3-year-old. After experiencing such a terrifying ordeal, it was hard for the family to believe that their son was back to his normal self, full of life and energy, just as he had been before. While the experience had been harrowing for Stephanie and Dylan, they were just grateful that their son had pulled through. Watching him back to his playful, spirited self was more than they could have hoped for. Colin's recovery, though quick, was nothing short of miraculous, and the family was deeply relieved that the effects of tic paralysis wouldn't have a lasting impact. Despite the terrifying ordeal, Stephanie and Dylan felt immense gratitude. The experience reminded them how fragile life is and how something as small as a tic can cause such a dramatic change. It also made them more aware of nature's hidden dangers. The doctors were impressed by Colin's quick recovery. Dr. Stork emphasized how critical it was that they acted fast and got Colin to the hospital, which prevented long-term damage. Colin, now fully recovered, was back to his energetic self. He's back to being his usual self, Dylan said, smiling as he watched Colin play. The parents, exhausted but grateful, couldn't have been happier. What began as a normal family outing became a wake-up call for Stephanie and Dylan. They realized how quickly things can change and the importance of trusting their instincts. Colin's recovery highlighted the value of early treatment and vigilance, reminding them of how precious their son is and how small actions can make a big difference.